Hey everybody, I'm going to wrap up our painting project, still life painting project with this last video. I'm going to go into some details, how to finish up the painting, and I'll just do these little snippets here so you can see where my painting is developing. So my recommendation is when you're working into these details, do it bit by bit, piece by piece. And again, what you really need to ask yourself is, what am I missing? What can I notice that I haven't noticed before? And being able to apply those small, minute details into this work is really going to make it shine. So let's go in and see where we're at with the painting that I've been working on. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to point out was, I've been overlaying an image, a photograph that I took, the still life, and you can tell in the photograph it's a little bit different than the still life painting that I'm working on because I am working from observation. So I'm using this. I'm sitting in the same seat at the same height to look closely at the still life, and it is hard to photograph exactly the same as your eyes see. Cameras and our eyes are set up a little bit differently. So what I'm gonna do is go into some details. I would zoom in. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to point out was a technique that I use a lot, which is really great with watercolor, and it's actually more of an erasing technique. So what I noticed in here is that the shell is being reflected into the bottle as well as the glove. And so what I'm going to do is kind of take away some of this and add in layers of a little bit of this orangey kind of sienna color and then a bit of the blue into the bottle so it looks like it's reflective. I've already started a little bit here, you can see. And basically the technique is to take a wet brush, okay, kind of saturate the area a little bit. And you kind of have to, polish it a little bit, kind of work the brush back and forth in order for the paint to be reactivated and actually, lift from the surface. Now I will add that you can't do this too many times before you hit the pulp of the paper. If you notice the paper starting to lift, then you should probably stop. So once it's saturated like that, you've got a little bit of time before you can take a paper towel and simply blot it. And notice how much of the paint has come up. So that gives me a great opportunity then to take a little bit of color and add a translucent layer. So I've got this sienna that I'm mixing up, right, with a little bit of blue so that I can, and I'm watering it down, and I'm just going to paint in a little bit of that to give it that quality of the shell. So reflections are interesting because you can see both the object that's reflected, plus you can see through it. So we need to kind of convey that effectively as we're working into it. All right, so I'll add that into it, which looks pretty good. The reflection does get darker closer to the shell when I'm looking at the still life, so I'm just going to leave that as is. Next, I'm just going to go in, and I can see the glove kind of wrapping around in this area here, so I'm going to lift up some of this color in through here, and that will be a bit of the reflection of the glove that I'll add in. So again, you need to kind of like keep it saturated, keep it wet, not dripping so it's going to go all over the place, but just enough that you can pick it up a little bit. All right. So this is a good technique. A lot of people want to go over and add white over the top of things for highlights, which you can try to do. But white, even though the white is a little more opaque than the other colors, it's not going to completely cover. So this technique allows you to kind of like lift up some of the tone, and also it softens too, right? Like it's kind of like when we were erasing in the graphite drawing, it makes a softer mark, right? For clouds and sky and water and stuff like that. This is the same thing. All right, got that lifted up, and then I'm going to mix up. I already have some of the glove color, which is the cobalt blue, a little bit of white, and I'm going to choose a little bit smaller brush and get that paint activated, and then I can add in some of that color there, right? So again, color is not static. It bounces around, bounces off of objects, it gets reflected into objects, and we need to be able to show that in the work that we're doing. Again, noticing is the important part. Another area I'm going to use this technique is I see a little bit of reflection on the left side of the bottle, kind of a long striation. So I'm going to take and make a long striation through here like this. I'm going to do this really quickly because I don't want the violet to blend too much into the background. I'm already striking this a little bit. That's all right. blot this up pretty quickly and actually go back and try to get some of that to come out a little bit more. So again, what I just want to point out is that watercolor, while it can definitely stain your clothes and stuff like that, it's not super permanent on the surface, which is great for these types of techniques where we can apply some more details to, right? So that's looking pretty good compared to what I'm noticing, and I'm going to add in a little bit of green to this because I'm getting that kind of reflection happening. Right, so that's a great way to start to think about adding highlights and details into areas. I'm going to go into another technique in just a minute. Let me just pause it for a sec. I'll come right back. Okay, so the next area that I'm going to focus on is this the neck and the lid of this bottle, and what I'm noticing at the bottle is there's a lot of these thin line striations that run through it, and I want to capture those. So this is a different technique, which is called a dry brush technique. So what I want to do here is just get this into view. I want to take my flat brush and I want to dry it off with a paper towel and kind of spread out the bristles like this. All right. So I have a dry brush, and then I have another brush here with some paint. Let's get this into focus. Working on small here, zoom out a little bit. All right, so then I've got this paint that I'm mixing up, and it's already dry, which is good. And I want to add just a little bit of water in here because I don't want it to be too wet. All right. And what I'll do is with this, kind of thin, but rather, a little bit darker color. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of green into here too. Okay, that's pretty good. So I'll take this dry brush, right? And you need to have a piece of paper to test this out on to really make it effective. But you just kind of like grab some of that color, okay? Kind of spread out the bristles a little bit, and then you can see that I'm getting multiple marks, and I'm going to make it darker for you to be able to see. Let's do it with this violet here. There we go. So you see how I'm getting lots of little lines? That can be really effective when you're working with different tones as well. So, but you want to keep the paint relatively dry. So I'm going into these areas where it's been like dried and kind of like, again, separating the bristles a little bit and then using that technique. So that when I come in here, I'm going to go around the neck of the bottle just lightly to get some of those striations to come in. A little bit more liquid to make this work. There we go. All right, so I'm getting a little bit of that kind of linear, multiple linear textures that I'm looking for, and making it a bit more effective in that way. So dry brush technique, you can, if you do it well, you should mix up a dark color, right? And let's just darken this a bit. There we go. Separate out your brush so it has multiple lines, and then you can use it to paint, very textural kind of linear marks, right? So that can be really helpful when you're starting to work into this part of the project. All right, so that's pretty good. Got some details going there. Dry brush technique is good for a variety of things. Again, you make the paint dark and make your brush dry, and you can add sort of scratchy texture marks over the surface. All right, so I'm going to be adding some details to this lid and back a little bit. You can see that I've added a bit more tone and contrast into these areas. Notice how these white reflections look much brighter now that I've added a darker background around them. So remember that you're really going to make things look lighter by increasing contrast, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a little bit of black, all right, and some of the green, and some of the crimson to make a pretty dark color, all right? And now this, what I'm going to do is when I'm adding paint to the brush, I'm also going to roll it a little bit, and that's going to make for a really nice point, right? And then I can go in here and do some linear elements. And this is going to take a little bit of practice, but what you want to do is just slowly add the paint to get those darker tones to come. Brush down really hard, you're going to get a wide mark. If you very lightly touch, you can get a thin mark. And it's just a matter of practicing between those type of mark making. So I'm just looking for where I can add contrast to this. And if it looks too dark to begin with, it's probably okay, because you might need to just add more tones around it. So I'm looking for any of those darker areas where I can start to add, again, some more contrast and detail into it. Okay, so what I've been doing is adding in a little bit. I made a gray color by, some of the crimson and green and black, and watered it down quite a bit, adding that gray into some of these areas. And notice how the white areas are starting to pop now. Also just going in and looking really closely at where I can see dark and where I can see light, and where I may need to add a little bit more contrast to get certain areas to pop out. It's just going to take some time. If you make a mistake, if you find an area that's a little bit too dark, just get your brush wet again and kind of, knock it back a little bit, add some water to it over the top of it, soften it. And that sometimes is a great way to help as well. Typically, reflective areas have lots of different tones. So the more variety of tones you have, the more reflective it's going to look. Okay, well, I'm getting farther along with the bottle. You can see that I'm getting a lot more reflection and detail out of this. I'm just going to keep working away. But, some techniques, lifting up the tone, adding in other translucent colors on top, looking for areas of contrast to make highlights really pop out, using really thin linear marks to start to add some of those details into this are really good techniques to kind of work in and finish this up. Okay, folks, I've gotten a bit farther on my still life here. I've added a whole lot more contrast and linear components to the glove, mixing up some black in with the Prussian blue to get some really dark areas. I've also gone back with my wet brush and pulled out some of the highlights to get this to look more like it's catching some light. I've added a whole lot of contrast in the shell, both in the bottom side and in the interior, and then a lot of linear components on there as well to make it really feel textural. What I'm going to do to finish up is, I might still work a bit more onto this, but I want to get the background to look more like it has this field of depth. So I'm going to darken this in the background and a little bit in the foreground. And to do that, I've got this bigger brush that's chock full of water. And what I'm going to do is just simply bring in like an even kind of coating of water. You've got to be careful to go around these areas. I'll probably go in there a little bit more with my paint. But for now, I just want to get an even coating so that I can drop in some dark color pretty quickly. So I'm just getting this fairly well saturated in the background with a lot of water, and then I'm going to add in my paint. So I mixed up over here some pretty dark green, and I'm just going to start at the top and kind of brush this in. Okay, folks, so here you can see I've gotten a little farther. Check out what happened with the contrast of this area up here once I added the darker background. Now notice I just did a little bit of it, kind of did a diagonal blend. That's actually how it looks a little bit in the studio here. I added actually a little bit more on the ground to sort of give a sense of surface. I'm probably going to go in and add a little more contrast to the shell eventually, but between the ground, the color, the glove, the bottle, the glass-like quality, I think I've gotten pretty far. So for you, what I'm really looking for here is, first, a good representation of the form. Second, make sure that you get some nice base colors down and try to match accordingly. Third, you really got to try to bump up the contrast. You're going to have a wide range of tone from light to dark, kind of, and everything in between. And then finally, scrutinize those details. Try to use the brush, experiment with different ways that you can remove areas, add layers of color, think about linear components, think about texture, dry brush techniques, wet techniques to let it dry and move around in different ways. And then finally, really try to capture the light and dark. The contrast is going to be what really brings this out, makes it alive. So that's what we're looking for. So let me know if you have questions. Happy to discuss further. You can email me an image of your progress. We can discuss via Zoom, but I'm here at your disposal. Coming up very, very soon will be our abstract project, which will be a relationship to this still life project that we're working on now. But until then, I'll see you soon.